Well, Wado, and thank you so much for opening us up in such a beautiful way. I think it's a great way to start our first training for the Tribal Stewardship Strategy. So a huge Wado, and thank you, Vince. Really appreciate your opening remarks and opening us in such a beautiful way. It is now my honor to introduce to you all my boss, Secretary Wade Crowfoot, who is our fearless leader here at the California Natural Resources Agency, to provide some opening remarks. Secretary.
Good to see you. Well, thank you all for being here on this really important day. I consider this a next step in a journey that we're on across California together, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Some of you I know and have had a chance to work with. For others who I haven't, I look forward to meeting you and working with you over today and the next few days. Just a little bit on the Natural Resources Agency. If you haven't worked with us before, we're a large environmental agency for the state. We include about 26 departments, boards, and commissions. Many big departments that you've heard of or worked with, like CAL FIRE and state parks, water resources, Fish and Wildlife, our Department of Conservation, our 10 conservancies, our Coastal Commission, and our focus, if I had to sum it up, is helping people and nature thrive together. And what we know and what we've learned and what we continue to learn is we can't do that without supporting tribal leadership, first and foremost. This journey started 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, when Governor Newsom, just after he took office, and some of you, if you're tribal leaders, were actually with him when he invited tribal leaders to Sacramento and did something that no other California governor had done, which is issue a formal apology on behalf of the state to tribal governments and communities and tribal people across California for, at that point, 170 years of land dispossession, disconnection, discrimination, and violence. And he read the words of California's first governor in his inaugural address, in which he put a bounty on the heads of Native women and children. California's first governor. California starting with an official policy of genocide and extermination. And that was a powerful day, and that was a powerful moment. I think the most powerful moment in my career and the work that I do. But tribal leaders and the governor agreed that while it was powerful, if it was all that happened, it would probably be counterproductive. The state of California has to follow up that recognition with action. So the last 5 years have been about that journey. And at the Natural Resources Agency, we reflected on how to approach that journey. And it's really 3 steps. The first is to acknowledge that I represent institutions that have perpetuated these historic wrongs. Whether it's land dispossession or disconnecting Native people from traditional practices, these are institutions that we inherit, and we need to acknowledge that. Second, we need to listen and learn about what we've done wrong over time and how we need to change our ways. And so that's been a journey that continues to this day for myself and others. Some of you have participated in the Truth and Healing Council that the governor established with that apology. And that's both about getting everything on the record in terms of what's happened in California's history, but then also listening and learning from Native leaders, Native communities about what we need to do. So acknowledge, listen and learn, and then act. And today is about action. What we've learned from our Native leaders is, as Vince put it, Native hands on Native lands. We need to focus across our government on ancestral land return, land back into Native ownership, co-management of our lands and resources, and access for tribal people to these lands that they and you have stewarded since time immemorial. And we've made some progress, and I'm proud of the progress that we've made, but with a lot of work ahead. Many of you know that we were able to establish, the governor and the legislature, a $100 million, what we call a tribal nature-based solutions program. That's $100 million to tribes to get ancestral land return. 34 projects over 30,000 acres getting native lands back into native hands, and that's an important step forward. Our Wildlife Conservation Board, our State Coastal Conservancy have identified funding that they control for ancestral land return, and that process continues. Other departments in our agency, like Department of Fish and Wildlife, our State Lands Commission, some of our conservancies, including most recently the Coachella Valley Mountains Conservancy, have actually moved funding or land that they control back into ancestral land return. So we've made progress. Likewise, on co-management, there's a lot of work, a lot of progress happening. We've got a great leader on that. I was just talking to Victor, who leads Humboldt Redwood State Park up in the North Coast. He was the first state park superintendent to sign a co-management agreement with a tribe to ensure tribal access for ceremony, for gathering, but also to help shape the management and to help direct how those lands are managed. And that's happening across state parks. Actually, over 50% of the lands under state park control, over 800,000 acres, are now managed under these co-management, co-stewardship agreements. So we're making progress, but we have to make a lot more. And so what you see on the screen behind me, or what you saw on the screen behind me, is explaining that we are trying to institutionalize this work through a tribal stewardship strategy. And one thing we realize is that while we can do certain things in state agencies, we have powerful allies in this movement, which are our land trusts. And many of you in the room are Native leaders, Native American leaders. Some of you are leaders of land trusts that are non-Native. And from my perspective, in this work that we have to do to heal California, to protect, to restore 30% of our lands by 2030, which we call 30 by 30, land trusts are our leaders. I talk a lot about us needing to put wind in the sails of our land trusts. And I'm so excited that there's this growing recognition that non-Native land trusts and Native American governments and communities can work together to conserve more land, but also to get more land back into Native American ownership and stewardship. So today is all about learning from each other, being really clear about the historic wrongs that we're looking to redress, how, for those of us who are not Native American, how we can explore partnerships in a respectful way with tribal leaders. And then also, if we come from a Native American government or community, how can we leverage constructively land trusts, either native controlled land trusts or non-native land trusts that could be partners to actually achieve our tribal sovereignty goals. So this conversation has never happened before. And I want to thank you for being part of something which I think can be a big step forward. And Geneva, big thanks to your leadership. Geneva is our first Deputy Secretary for Tribal Affairs. And frankly, all of that progress that I mentioned is thanks to Geneva and her team driving that. So just want to give you a quick round of applause. So to kick us off today, I am so excited to have Chairperson Karina Gold with us today. I've had a chance to meet Chairperson Gold and hear her words. She serves as the chairperson for the Confederated Villages of Lichjan, which we know as the Bay Area today. She is also the co-director of the Sogoreete Land Trust, which is an important organization that's enabled her and her people to drive towards protecting sacred burial sites in the Bay Area, building co-management agreements, and importantly, getting ancestral land returned back to her communities. So Chairperson, we're honored to have you kick us off today. I invite you up.
Good day, relatives. I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. I had a journey all the way from my territory all the way up here. It took me like 2 hours, and I was like, wow, am I going to get there on time? I didn't know. 2 bathroom stops along the way. I got here to this territory. And so I'm just so thankful for all of the ancestors along the way that helped and assisted me to get here. So thankful for the ancestors on whose lands that we are standing on today. And I'm so grateful that I'm able to speak on behalf of my ancestors and my elders and the future generations of our people. And thank you, Geneva, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation today about rematriation and the work that our people have been doing in the Bay Area for decades now. And we started this work really around protecting and preserving our sacred sites, our burial sites along the Bay, shell mounds. And many of you know, because we're California Native people, that folks learn about us in 4th grade and then we disappear. What I call a continuous genocide of our people. That we get what I call a white paper genocide, right? That we're taught about in 4th grade history and then we're taught about in the past and never taught about again. What our dreams were was to really talk about how do we save our ancestors from development. And so I grew up in my territory in the Bay Area, and one of our territories called Huchun. Huchun actually encompasses 6 Bay Area cities: Alameda, Oakland, Berkeley, Emeryville, Albany, and Piedmont. It's one of our territories. But in the 1990s, there was this thing that happened, right? And all this money came into the Bay Area. And this money that was brought in was because of something called the internet. And it caused this wave of gentrification throughout the Bay Area. And indigenous people and people of color were forced out of their own homes because people were buying, or just they were actually bidding on houses and apartments at such a rate that people couldn't afford to live there anymore, just like today, right? People can't afford to. Most of our tribal members can't afford to live in our own territory. But we had started this work about doing recognition because nobody knew about shell mounds. They knew about what the generic term of Ohlone is, but they didn't know about what shell mounds were. These burial sites and village sites of my ancestors along the bay where fresh water met salt water. And all along those areas were places that were being desecrated by development for over 100 years. That this desecration continued to happen, and our tribes continue to stand up and continue to go to city council meetings and continue to fight against this. And then we created a walk to actually bring recognition. And we started our walk at the very top of our territory in Carquin land on the Carquinez Strait in a village site called Segurite. And we were joined by people from all over the world that walked with us to these shell mounds. We walked from Vallejo, where Segurite is, down to San Jose and up to San Francisco, a 300-mile walk, stopping at these shell mounds along the way that were under railroad tracks and parking lots and schools and bars and apartment buildings and streets. And we laid down our prayers, asking those ancestors to remember us as we were remembering them. And we did that walk for 5 years. With people from Nova Scotia and Japan and Australia and people from all over the world and all over Turtle Island that joined us on those walks. And we walked 18 miles a day, sleeping on church floors and in community centers and sometimes outside. And we were met by people along the road that asked us what we were doing and had never heard about us because we had been erased from our own homelands. When I think about our homelands, I said, what is it that can show that we're still there besides just our shell mounds? And I went to Hawaii recently. We went there for language revitalization work and to look at the rematriation work that was happening with our Kanaka Maoli people. And we saw that everywhere was language. Language was on the streets, language was being spoken, language was everywhere. And you walk and you fly into Hawaii and you see their language and you hear their music. In our territories that are Ohlone territories, there are three airports: Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose. None of them say welcome to Lashawn territory, welcome to Ramaytush territory, welcome to Tamian territory. None of them say those things. How do you know whose land you're on and how easy it is to forget that you're on indigenous land? Segurite Land Trust was created because we had to figure out a way to get land back. We had prayed in front of UC Berkeley for years and years for the 9,000 plus ancestral remains of our people to be returned to us. Those prayers for those ancestors to be returned that were sitting in racks and in boxes and in rooms. But we found ourselves homeless in our own homeland. That as LaShawn people, I owned a home, Habitat for Humanity house, and my auntie owned a home in Oakland. And of all the LaShawn people, that was all the land that we had. And if we were to get 9,000 ancestors returned, where would they go? And so we took over a site in 2011, our village site, Segorite, that had 2 shell mounds on it, where fresh water met salt water. And when the city of Vallejo went bankrupt, they gave the park district $30,000 worth of permits for free in order to destroy that site that we have been trying to save for 12 and a half years. And we are blessed that we had federally recognized tribes that stepped in on behalf of us to save that site and to create the first cultural easement of its kind between a city, 2 federally recognized tribes, and a park district that saved that land, that allowed those tribes to have just as much rights as they did as the city or the park district. It was an amazing win that we are allowed still to go back there and to practice our ceremonies for our salmon that come through the oceans, through the bay, and up our Carquinez Strait, our salmons that go home again through that same way, that we still have the ability to do that. But Segorite, with 109 days of staying there with people from intertribal people that stood with us around that sacred fire that was lit for 109 days, made us think about what we could do, because we lived there as a village. We forgot what it was like living in a city, to live amongst each other, to wake up and to put prayers down at that fire, to eat together and to pray together and to stand together for something. And so the Segorite Land Trust was created because one of our board members that you're going to hear from soon, Beth Rose Middleton, wrote a book called Trust in the Land. And in that meeting, in that time, she had been watching what was going on and invited me to a meeting in Southern California where there were native land trusts that were being created. And I came back and I talked to Janella LaRose, who is the co-founder and co-director of Segorite Land Trust, about this idea. What does it look like for Indigenous people to do a land trust? How do we get land back so we can reinter our ancestors and give them dignity? But not only give them dignity, and give everybody else a part of that dignity and that healing that needs to happen to put our ancestors back in the land. So Segorite Land Trust was created out of that conversation. But we also talk about it, about what it meant to be a women-led land trust, the first urban Indigenous women-led land trust in the country, because our lands are basically urbanized. What does it mean for us to begin to do that work? What does it mean for people to be reconnected with land? It brings back language and ceremony and songs. It brings back a connection with those plant relatives. It reminds us who we are as human beings again. And then we could bring other people along with us. But it needed to be an Indigenous women-led land trust because of colonization and the way that it happened, women were taken from their powers. They were not allowed to make decisions anymore. They were not allowed to be the leaders of their roundhouses. They were not allowed to speak on behalf of their tribes. And because of that, our men had been forced to take on some of these positions that they hadn't before. But it was also a healing process for our men, our sons, our grandsons, our uncles, our nephews, to come back to what their right relationship was to the land and to our people. And so to begin to think about that. In the Bay Area, we are also faced with people that were forcibly relocated to our territories, that have not been able to go back home, that have not had connection to the land, that needed a place where they could also offer prayers in this cement place, this place with asphalt, this place that did not notice even them, except during Indigenous Peoples Day or Native American Heritage Month, which I'm sure all of you understand that this is probably the busiest time of the year for many of us. We want it to be not forgotten anymore, to be able to bring ceremony back, to remember, to bring that language back, that language that's yearning, that land that's yearning to hear that language that was created there, that land and those plants and those trees and those waterways that are yearning to hear the language of the Lashan people, the Chochenyo language. Our language has been asleep for almost 100 years. And my daughter, Deja Gould, is bringing that language back, which is part of the reason we connected with our Kanaka Maui people. We're also connecting with our people that are in Aotearoa and Ireland, those people that are bringing back languages, and many other people that are across Turtle Island to do that work. The Sogorea Land Trust is a land trust that is hopefully bringing land back into Indigenous hands through many different ways. And we have learned that it doesn't come back in just one way. We have done handshakes with people. Our first piece of land that was returned to us was an agreement, a verbal agreement with a nonprofit, a 1/4 acre of land that was full of trash. And 6 years later, that trash has been taken away. California plants are grown there, medicinal plants, and our first arbor in 250 years has been placed on that land. That land holds ceremony now. It's held a wedding for my daughter during COVID. It's held fires for our relatives that have passed away. It has had graduations and birthday parties, and it has welcomed people from all different parts of the world. We are working in collaborations with UC Berkeley on a piece of land. We have had 2 pieces of land returned to us through a generous donor. And we had to purchase back our oldest sacred site in the Bay Area through generous donations of people that have realized that it is their responsibility to work alongside the Indigenous people. And while I applaud the state of California for the $100 million of monies that are going to purchase back land, our small 2.2 acres of land cost $27 million in order to free her. And so we have to do better together. And we have to think about the future generations, that the work that we do in rematriation and Indigenous women's work to bring back land and ceremony and song and regeneration of our plants and waters. California is a very young state, and I really believe that 50 different waterways were just in our territory, Huchun. And in those 50 different waterways, almost all of them have been culverted, stopping our salmon and steelhead trout from coming back. But that when we're looking at climate disaster together, when we're facing that as a human race, that we could actually do something to reverse that. That we begin to open up those creeks and waterways, that we create these small climates that cool the earth down, that we are able to clear out the waterways in a very short amount of time. That over just less than 200 years that this state has been in existence, that we could actually reverse the harms that we have done, that we could actually clean up the bay so we could actually eat out of it again, that we can bring back our oysters and clams so that we could be sustainable again, so that we could begin to think about the next 7 generations and the work that they are going to do, not to inherit the harms that have been created by human beings, but for us to stand side by side to work with the next generations to do the work together to stop this disaster. So we always pray for the next 7 generations to have good air to breathe and good soil to grow food and medicines in and good water to drink, but also a relationship with fire that we have forgotten for so long, that our relative fire needs to be brought back in a respectful manner so that our lands that are used to having them there will be used to it again, and that we could all flourish in a different kind of way. That when we do this work together, that we are truly doing the work that our ancestors have called us to do. And that we don't have a word for it in our language, the Chochenyo language yet, but the Hawaiian relatives call it your kuleana, a way for us to come back, our way, our teachings, our way of being, what we are called to do on this earth today. And I believe that a land trust is a way to do that. is creating ways for us to create partnerships with the state and with the county and with private landowners. And I really want to urge people that are working with land trusts today to work with the indigenous people on whose land you are on. One of the things that I learned when I went to that first meeting many years ago about native land trusts is that many land trusts put up signs and they put up fences that says keep out. And I think that many native land trusts are really about how do we re-engage human beings back into the land. It's not about keeping people out. Human beings have always had their hands in the land. When people first came to our territories, they wrote in their diaries about how beautiful the land was taken care of and how wonderful it was to see that this land you can see under the canopy. And that's because our ancestors always took care of the lands. And so, relatives, I'm so thankful to be a part of these conversations today. I thank you so much for listening to me this morning, and I hope that you have a wonderful time engaging with each other's minds and hearts. Oh.
Well, Wado, and thank you so much, Chair Gold. What a beautiful way to start out today, and really thinking about what does it mean to strengthen partnerships between California Native American tribes and land trusts as we think about ancestral land return. I am so excited to have this conversation with you all, and so appreciative of you taking time out of your very busy schedules to be here today to connect, learn, share throughout the day.